Okay, so away we go with part two of the Phylum Chordata lecture here. So again, please remember what are the criteria to be in Phylum Chordata? What's the uniqueness about the subphylum Urochordata, subphylum Cephalochordata, and then the subphylum Vertebrata that we're currently talking about right now. So what are the criteria, kind of the steps? Think about the dichotomous key. What are the steps required to move you into the subphylum Vertebrata? And once we're in subphylum Vertebrata here, what makes vertebrates different from each other? So that's what we're going to start talking about now and break it down into the groupings within the Vertebrata. So vertebrates, subphylum Vertebrata, evolved roughly around 545 million years ago. Some kind of chordata ancestor that developed that backbone, that endoskeleton, those key features, was swimming around the ocean of the world, the Earth, and then it started to evolve and give rise to other groups of vertebrates. So when we think about this, the earliest vertebrates started in the ocean. So they're all fish. The earliest vertebrate ancestor is a fish-like, I should say, ancestor that gave rise to fish. The fish then diversified and evolved into all sorts of different groups. From the fish, we see amphibians, and then the amphibians made the transition to land. From land, the amphibians, we see the evolution of the reptiles, and then we get the branching into the birds and the mammals. Okay, so this is kind of the big picture. I'm going to try to draw it out, and it's going to be ugly because I'm using the mouse, but here's a general picture of how this evolutionary process worked. All right, so we had these early fish-like ancestors. These are known as jawless. That's supposed to say jawless fish swimming around the ocean. And these guys are still here today. So down here, this is modern time today. And from the jawless fish, we see the rise of fish that had jaws. So I want you to think about it. If you're a fish or a fish-like creature and you evolve this jaw structure, it now changes your ecological, give you a big little fin there, your ecological niche. So jawless fish, well, they're mostly suckers, scavengers. They suck on the side of their prey and they feed and they're effective. But now if you have a jaw, ooh, I'm actually a predator. I'm a carnivore because I can crush down, chomp, bite, and eat things. So what happened is a lot of the lines of jawless fish, they went extinct. They couldn't continue to adapt and evolve. They were outcompeted by the jawed fish. Jawed fish are still here today. We still have them today. But from the jawed fish, we eventually see the evolution of a line that led to amphibians. And the earliest amphibians, I'm supposed to say amphibians, the earliest amphibians, they weren't much different from fish. They had a jaw, but they had leg-like structures that enabled them, oh, that's terrible, no better than when it's on the board in class, right? So, all right, I know, eye rolls and oh my God, how horrible can the drawings be? But if you remember, that's all I care about. So the amphibians, now they're accessing terrestrial environments. Game changes. Ooh, if I can get out of this puddle and crawl up onto shore, I might be able to eat some of those insects that are out there that adapted and evolved to life on land. Maybe I can access some of those plants that adapted and evolved to life on land. So think about how this process is working. Whole new world if you move out of water and onto land. But amphibians are still tied to the water. Early amphibians were huge, and we still have amphibians today. Unfortunately, they're declining in diversity. It's a group that is in extreme stress. From the amphibians, though, we see the evolution of the reptiles. Now, I want you guys to think about a frog or a toad and say, okay, what does it take to go from a frog or a toad and turn into a reptile? You know, think about physical changes you would have to tweak on a frog or a toad to make it a reptile. Dry the skin out, allow it to move away from water and not be dependent upon water for reproduction and breathing. And now you move towards a reptile. Not a huge physical change, but now we have reptiles. Reptiles did really, really well. Reptiles did really, really well on land. So they evolve and move out onto land and take over lots of land environments. Dun dun, dinosaurs are evolved from reptiles. They're one of the stem groups of reptiles that branched off. So reptiles did really well. Some of them are still here today, but the reptile line gave rise to two other groups that are still here today. Can anybody guess what it is? It's supposed to be an owl. So anybody who knows Professor Rotary, tell them about the owl drawing. So reptiles evolved into birds. Birds are the descendant of reptiles. Think about all the reptile features. There's not a lot of physical changes to move to birds. Birds have scales. Look at their legs. Birds lay eggs. So do reptiles. There's a lot of those traits from reptiles that carried over into birds. Reptiles, what we call the stem reptile group, also gave rise to let's make this, what do we want to call this? A mouse? This is supposed to be some kind of mammal. Okay. Hopefully you guys get the picture. Mammals. That's supposed to be a leg, not a mouth. Put the mouth there. All right, so reptiles also gave rise to the mammals. So when we look at the evolutionary history of Chordata and then vertebrata, vertebrata branched out into all sorts of different varieties and diversity of life out there. Not the most diverse. Arthropoda gets that with the insects, and then mollusca gets that, second most diverse. But there's a ton of vertebrates out there that are members of Chordata, and this tends to be one of the groups we study the most and pay attention to the most. So, all right, so we're going to jump back and start with the fish. Let's talk about the jawless fish and see how these guys evolved. First thing is I need to fix my typo. So fish are a group of vertebrates. They make up over half of all the known vertebrates on Earth. They're the earliest vertebrates out there. They evolved roughly around 545 million years ago, and the earliest ones were simple, kind of tubular fish. They were jawless, and they had that suction cup mouth. Over time, fish evolved, just like everything else. It changes, it adapts, it evolves, or it goes extinct. Roughly 440 million years ago, we see the evolution of the basic fin structure, these bony shields or plates on their bodies, and then jaws. So we go from jawless fish to jawed fish. It took about 100 million years and gave us our jawed fish. And those guys just took off and did really, really well evolutionarily. So, okay, but to be a fish, all right, what are kind of the 5 key features we find in fish? Some of these are overlapping with the Chordata and the vertebrata features. Okay, so first key feature for fish. They all have a vertebral column and a skull. Variation on what this is made up of. Could be cartilage, could be bone, but there's a vertebral column and a skull. Fish all have jaws. They're jaw structures. Now, how good they are depends. But they also will have paired appendages. Some of them are more prevalent than others. Some of them are a bit more reduced. They all have gills. The gills are internal structures that enable fish to breathe and exchange gases within the water. Fish will have a single loop of blood circulation. So closed circulatory system. And fish have nutritional deficiencies. This means they have to eat certain amino acids. They can't produce all the necessary amino acids, so they have to consume specific ones to maintain optimal health. All right, so kind of the big general features for fish. With this closed circulatory system, let me make a note. Fish have a two-chambered heart. That will then go to the gills, through the body, come back to the heart, circulatory system there. Okay? All right, so now within the fish, I am not going to ask you guys to know these as class levels because there's some changes and some movements within it, some reorganization. So again, we're not going to stress about memorizing classes. Know them as these groups. This is how they're organized, kind of in these general groups. So the first group we want to talk about are the fish that don't have a really true jaw structure. These are called the jawless fish. Myxini are known as the hagfish, and Subphylum, I'm not even going to try to say that correctly. You guys find somebody who's a Latin instructor and have them do that. These are the lamprey. Now, hagfish tend to be deep sea fish, scavengers on the bottom of the ocean. They serve an important role, usually parasitic scavenger life cycle. So let me get some of those details up here. Ooh. So scavengers or parasites is what we're looking at. So these are lamprey attached to looks like a trout. And what they'll do is they'll attach on, they'll suction cup on, and then they have these little teeth here, and these little projections here, and they just kind of scrape and scratch and tear at the side of the animal, at the flesh of the animal, and then kind of just suck the nutrients from the animal, and then detach and swim away. So if you ever catch a big fish and it has a circular scar on it, almost looks like somebody took a cigarette or a cigar and burned a circle on the animal, that animal had been parasitized by most likely a lamprey. Again, hagfish tend to be deep sea scavengers. They eat the dead, decaying carcasses of animals that die in the ocean and sink to the bottom. There's a hyperlink there. It was working when I last checked it. That's actually some great footage of hagfish feeding on a whale carcass. And if you watch it, it's like a 1.5-minute video. And what you'll see is they'll suction on and then they'll twist their bodies to rip off a chunk of flesh because they don't have jaws where they can clamp down and just bite through the flesh. They suction and twist is how they rip pieces of flesh off of a decaying carcass. Okay, so those are the jawless fish. The next lecture, we're going to get into all of the jawed fish, and this is where you get some really, really amazing animals.